The big step I would say is listening, and whether it's a grown-up helping two youngsters work through a conflict and time to listen to each one, tell of their experience and their stories, or if it's, as you were teaching to youngsters to work out their stuff on their own, the next step is to listen. Tell me what happened, tell me how you feel, and not interrupting and not disagreeing with their story, but really validating those feelings. Wow, that sounds really embarrassing. I bet that was hard. Or you sound really, really angry about that. Or it must have felt really bad to be left out. I'm sorry that you feel that way. So listening.
Hello and welcome to the Sunshine Parenting Podcast, where each week we talk about ideas for raising kids who become thriving adults. I'm your host, Audrey Monkey. I'm a summer camp director, writer, and speaker, and I've had the privilege of working with thousands of children, teenagers, young adult counselors, and parents over the past 3 decades. My husband, Steve, and I are raising 5 kids who currently range in age from 15 to 25. So my interest in raising kind, optimistic, self-reliant kids who become thriving adults is personal as well as professional. In this episode of the podcast, Sara Kuljis and I continue our conversation about siblings. In this episode, we talk about conflict resolution skills that our kids need. It seems that kids have their first conflicts with siblings, so that's a great place for them to start learning how to resolve conflicts. But these strategies also work with their conflicts with other kids outside the family. Enjoy this episode. All right, we're back with Sara Kuljis for our second in our sibling series. And welcome back, Sara.
Thank you. It's good to be here and talk about that ongoing challenge of sibling rivalry.
I know I've been getting some great feedback, some emails and just feedback about people who've listened to our first episode. And I think it's been reassuring to people to realize that this is a very common situation. In fact, I don't think I know a family that doesn't have some sibling conflict issues.
And so often we as parents assume that means we're bad parents. But that's not always the case. Sometimes it's human nature.
Yes, it's definitely human nature. So we decided that today, based on what we started with on our last episode, we're going to focus on conflict resolution skills that our kids need, not just for their sibling interactions, but for life in general. And tell me a little bit about how often you have to deal with this at camp and how that comes up in the camp setting.
Well, the first few days of camp, our sessions are 2 weeks long, whether at day camp or resident camp. And very often we're all on our best behavior, the first few days of camp. But after we get a little more tired and a little more comfortable, that tends to be where we see conflict arise, even between friends who came to camp together or siblings who came to camp together. It's when we just don't have all our wits about us and resources about us. So often it's about halfway through a session. It's one of my favorite things about longer sessions that last longer than 5 days, is that we get to have a conflict. So we get to teach conflict resolution skills, and then they get to repair. And there's that last week of camp is even a closer friendship than it started with.
Yeah. It's funny because I think a lot of kids at camp will say they start feeling like siblings. And isn't that funny?
That's true.
That part of feeling like siblings is that you maybe have some more bickering and more conflicts. And like you said, you get more comfortable and maybe say things that are not as kind and that kind of things. So anyway, so this is obviously a topic that you and I both really enjoy talking about because it's something that we do get to work with kids on at camp and in our own homes.
It's true. And I know for me, there's sometimes I have felt like, wow, that went well. And then so many times that I have been discouraged at how I handled it or how it's still ongoing. And so it takes a village to learn how to shape a child.
Yes, it does. And, oftentimes conflicts don't get wrapped up with a bow and perfectly solved and they're ongoing. But let's just talk about some of the steps that can be helpful as parents helping siblings or kids dealing with conflicts with their friends. What do you think is sort of the first thing to know about in terms of conflict resolution?
I think typically between siblings or maybe something at camp, very often when conflict arises, there's a lot of emotions tied to it. It might be that we held our tongue for so long and then we just can't anymore. Or maybe a deep personal wound just occurred, and there usually is strong emotions. I think especially with children, but also with adults, we can't skip over the fact that I feel so strongly right now, I can't even think. I can't reason. I can't choose my words carefully. I feel so angry, hurt, sad, mad, afraid. And so what I would call the cooling off period is really essential to sometimes give time to let some hot air out of the balloon and do some breathing, get our wits about us, help a child calm and breathe so that he or she can begin to reason again. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I agree. I'm thinking of Daniel Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson's book, The Yes Brain. I really like how that book explains both what's going on with adults when we're frustrated with our child and what's going on with the child. And basically, we're operating out of our reptilian part of our brain.
Our downstairs brain.
Yes, the downstairs brain that often reacts in ways we don't really appreciate afterwards. And I think it's something that even adults sometimes have trouble with recognizing when we need a cool down period before we even respond to our child or their behavior. So this whole thing about you call it a cooling off. I always talk about it as calm down skills, or figuring out what is your way of calming down as an adult that you can model for your child. And that could be even just saying, gosh, your argument is making me so upset right now that I'm going to the other room and take a few deep breaths and just calm down. And then I'll talk to you. And just helping our kids see that that is part of life, getting upset and needing to take a break before we deal with a situation.
I so agree. I remember when my kids were little and putting a child who misbehaved in time out was the thing. And after a few years, I learned from a wise friend. She said, in our family, time outs aren't the punishment for bad behavior. Time out is a time to cool down. And she used the same term, but it was just to let a little person or a big person catch their breath, name their feeling, get the tears out, quiet their voice so that we don't say the things we might regret or have a tantrum, but cool down, time out. Yeah.
I don't know which camp guru talks about the chill spot. I really like that concept at camp where, you even before anyone's had any conflict, you have a spot in your home or in your cabin at camp where you have maybe some crayons and coloring stuff or some friendship string or a book or whatever. At home, it could be like a comfy spot with a candle that smells good next to it. And you call it's a positive thing, the chill spot. And you as an adult can go sit in there when you're feeling, so it's not a punishment, it's an opportunity to regroup. And then if you model for your kids, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to the chill spot for a few minutes. And they see, oh, gosh, even mom and dad need sometimes to regroup. Mm-hmm. So I like that concept of really normalizing the idea that there often needs to be a cooling off, calming down period in life.
And some kids are wired to have very vivid emotions. Some kids are more mild, but I have one who feels things at the very edge. Highs are so high, lows are so low. Hot is so hot. And especially for those kids, to not race them into conflict resolution or race them to an apology if they haven't caught their breath yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And anything that you try to resolve when one or both parties are upset, and this works for adults and marriages and every other kind of relationship as well, you don't get very far when you're not both calm. And so it's always a good idea to just make sure you're calm. So one of the things that I think is also important is sometimes we tell kids, take a deep breath, count to 10, these certain things. And what I like to do instead is to give kids kind of the smorgasbord of different things that work for some people. And this is the thing you want to talk about when they are calm again. But just, you could say something like, I noticed, when you were really upset yesterday, it seemed hard for you to just calm down. You were so upset. What are some things that you've tried to calm yourself down? And if they can't come up with anything, you can say, well, some kids I know, can take a couple deep breaths or use box breathing, or, other kids can go for a run around the block. Just giving them some different strategies so that they can start learning what's my best coping mechanism.
I have one member of my family that taking a shower is the main space, almost the only space. It doesn't have to be a long shower, but there's something about that is super calming. And for another one of my kiddos, if he can eat some protein and then just give him about 15 minutes, he comes back upstairs from that downstairs brain.
Yes. Yeah, that is true, especially with younger kids, but actually even adults. The blood sugar, low blood sugar, or being really tired can often put us where we are much less patient with each other and our emotions are right near the surface. So that's another really good thing. It's like, I guess it's not really a calm down, but it's like this self-awareness, helping our kids realize, oh, I feel myself getting into that kind of bad state. Or they say something, if they can actually learn to verbalize, wow, I think I'm just too hungry right now, and that's why I snapped. That's another thing that we could role model for them.
Absolutely. In fact, I remember early in my marriage, my husband saying, any disagreement we have after 9 p.m. is not going to go well.
Right.
And so we kind of we choose not to tackle those things after 9 p.m. when we're just too tired.
I agree. I actually find that too with my kids when they're having some kind of struggle. Anytime we try to talk about it late at night, it's just never good.
Yeah.
It's so much better to say, let's sleep on this and talk again in the morning when we're fresh. Because I agree, I can't really be a good coach or helper at that point. Neither can my kids. True. Okay, so our first it's funny, it's a conflict resolution thing. It really is more of a self thing. It's that
self-regulation.
Yes, self-regulation. Yeah. So what's your second tip or thing that you think about when you talk about helping with conflict resolution?
Well, the next kind of big step I would say is listening, and whether it's a grown-up helping two youngsters work through a conflict and time to listen to each one, tell of their experience and their stories, or if it's as you were teaching to youngsters to work out their stuff on their own, the next step is to listen. Tell me what happened. Tell me how you feel. And not interrupting and not disagreeing with their story, but really validating those feelings. Wow, that sounds really embarrassing. I bet that was hard. Or you sound really, really angry about that. Or it must have felt really bad to be left out. I'm sorry that you feel that way. So listening.
Yeah, so I think probably it starts with our kids having us mediate, teaching them how to do this. So, it might be that with siblings, for example, that you as a parent might say, okay, let's, after we're all calm, let's regroup. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you each time to explain what happened and what your perception is of the story or the events. And I want the other person to listen very carefully so that you both understand what the other person's feeling. So that then teaches them that skill for later. When they're just in any other relationship and they have to figure this out, they will then start practicing that skill of sharing their story, listening to other people's. I love in Brene Brown's book, I love how she teaches us to say, the story I'm telling myself is. And I've used that now as an adult because it's a really good way of when you're feeling sad, you feel like someone hurt your feelings or said something or did something that made you feel a certain way. You've told yourself a story about what the meaning behind that was. That they don't like me, that they don't value me or my time or whatever the story is. And so when you can say to someone, Sarah, the story I'm telling myself is that the reason that you stood me up on our lunch date is that you don't really value our friendship. And then it's what I'm really feeling, but it gives you the opportunity to be like, oh, wow, that's what you're feeling. So it's no longer me yelling at you about being late to lunch. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, I love that as an empathy builder. It's such a great lead in. And Brene in that same book has another rumble starter, as she calls it, that I love because it's a safe way to enter into some of these conversations. And she recommends saying, help me understand why you chose to do this, or help me understand why. Because we really sometimes can explain our whys, the why behind, even better than we can explain the straight up response.
Right.
And it's a gentler way.
Right.
Why did you do that? Help me understand why you chose that behavior.
Right.
So
to say something mean about me in front of our friends,
Yes.
or to
Yes.
like siblings, you have a friend over and they say some mean comment or something like that. Help me understand why you chose to say that mean thing in front of my
your friends. Yes.
And then maybe then again can bring up some feelings from the other person and say, I was feeling left out. I was feeling whatever. I don't know. So I do think that I love that whole just listening and somehow teaching them whatever the words are that are going to come most naturally, but something that has to do with how they're feeling, whether it's, what they perceived as happened and wondering why and ask that, or the story I'm telling myself is. I think that's really, really important. In my new book, Happy Campers, I share what I've learned from 3 decades of creating a culture where kids become happier while gaining important social and emotional skills. The book is based on my thousands of interactions with campers, camp counselors, and parents, my academic research in positive psychology, and interviews with camp directors from across the country. I introduce a framework of intentional strategies that can help parents create the same kind of transformational culture that kids experience at camp. Visit happycampersbook.com for information about retailers who are carrying the book, as well as many resources that will be helpful to you as you read the book, and join me on this journey to raise a generation of kids who become thriving adults. So when you're then the person, maybe, for some parents, maybe they're just listening to one child talk about it. So, what's a good parental response when, they're listening well to the child telling kind of their version, their feelings? What then is the best response for the parent at that point?
I think at that point, until, or at least what we would often do at camp and what I've been done with my kids, is really parrot back. Mm-hmm. What I hear you say is, you were really angry when your sister told that, most embarrassing moment of yours in front of her friends. I hear you were embarrassed all over again, and that made you feel less than, and it was hard to be around her. Is that correct? And just saying it again, sometimes we as parents mishear. We jump to our own experience that, I had an experience just like that. I think it's important to remember we need to not steal our kids' experiences or project our experiences on them. So to repeat back, parrot back, and let them clarify if we got it wrong. No, Mom, I didn't say that. I meant.
Good.
And so that's been really helpful. I also think it helps a child continue to put words around their experiences, which is just a really important life skill. So we haven't yet moved to a problem-solving place yet. We're just listening. What words would you use?
Well, I love that. And I was actually, as you were talking, I was thinking you're also at the same time modeling for your child how they need to react when they're in a conflict with someone else. So I love how you, like, if you're just the person, kind of the intermediary, the kid comes to you, they've calmed down, but they're sharing their experience, and you're saying, okay, so what I hear you saying is you're this. And they say, no, it was more like this. And you're saying, okay, so, and you're kind of helping them. You're trying to really understand. That's so good, because then they're also learning from you how to do that. So that if someone comes to them with a problem about them, maybe they'll be able to use those same tools. I like something you mentioned before we started recording, was just that really important thing of validating, regardless of if you think their complaint, their issue, whatever it is, might seem trivial to you, might not seem worth being upset about. It's really important. That is how they're feeling. And so I think validating that is also really important. So even if you think something wasn't a big deal, or maybe you didn't even notice what it was that they're upset about, still just saying, oh, wow, you know what? I can tell this really, really hurt you.
Yeah. And I think that also normalizes, when we have strong feelings, it's really scary to feel alone in the world. I'm the only one who's ever felt this hurt. I'm the only one who ever felt left out, or this angry, or felt taken advantage of.
Right.
And when someone else can say, wow, that really, I really understand it felt like that, then it reminds me that I probably can tolerate it and survive it.
Right. It's funny, as we were just talking, I was thinking too about how, I don't know if your kids have ever kind of told you that, you've treated them or you've done something different.
I'm a middle child. I know about this stuff.
And I was thinking about that sometimes it might be like, sometimes we want to defend ourselves, but really we should just be validating our kids to say, I can tell that you feel very like that it's been unfair or that I've been unfair to you. But even just validating their feelings.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't agree with them, you can still validate, well, that must feel really hard if you think that I'm giving different privileges to your sibling than to you. But instead of just like, because you want to feel defensive when someone says, kind of accuses you of something. So to be able to validate their feelings, even when you totally disagree with them, is a really important skill that that would be helpful for our kids to learn.
Absolutely. Well, after you've listened really well, Audrey, where do you go from there?
Well, I really like this thing that I learned in sort of our leadership training at camp. We have this trainer that comes and have taught like new supervisors just basic skills when you're talking about some kind of performance issue. And it really has stuck with me. We call it you, me, and the issue. And I think of it as, here I am. I'm using my hands even though we're on a podcast, but here I am, here you are, these two people, and we are both, the arrows go down to something called the issue. So it reminds us not to say, you're lazy, or something that's sort of an adjective about a person, or you're crabby, or no accusations at the person. Instead, if it's, for example, a counselor, you'd say something like, I noticed that you arrived with your group at 8:15 at breakfast, and breakfast starts at 8. So, tell me what we can do about this issue of being late to breakfast. So it's not about the person. It's like both of us are together solving this one issue. So I think with kids, sometimes it's hard to identify the issue. And sometimes we can help them articulate what the issue actually is, because we don't usually think that way. We usually jump first to some kind of labeling. You're lazy, you're crabby, you're unenthusiastic, you're whatever. And it's so important to actually come up with what is an actual issue, behavior, something that is the thing we can talk about together, as opposed to like accusing each other of things. So that's, I guess, what you would call identifying the problem.
I think that's brilliant to have that issue. It's almost then a common enemy. You and I together get to meet this common enemy. And I think that's a brilliant way to approach it. One of the key parts of it is it's taken time to really identify the real problem. Often we can get spun out in an argument and we end up solving not the main part. We're just trying to get them to be quiet because they're too noisy for the neighbors or for grandma who's taking a nap in the next room. When the real issue was, she keeps borrowing my things without asking. Oh, that's the issue. You feel like that's, and so whatever it is, naming the actual problem and then holding it out in front of us for both of us to solve.
Mm-hmm. I think of that. I was just thinking about like in marriages, like you could do the same thing when you're talking about, the issue could be our different views of how much money we should save. So instead of you're spending too much or you're too stingy or you're irresponsible, right? Instead we have this issue that we view money differently or how we spend it. Let's talk about that issue. How can we together work on a plan to solve the issue of our differences in how we, want to spend and view money? And so instead you're talking about this thing out there, working on it together as opposed to throwing mean words at each other.
That's brilliant. I mean, when you think of how we get ignited when we take things personally, it's hard for an adult to keep their cool and self-regulate. How much harder for a little youngster to know how to self-regulate. Yeah. So, getting to the root of it or naming the problem.
I feel like we should add, after we're done recording and when we put some show notes up, I think we should give some examples of what some issues might be.
Oh, that's good.
Do you know what I mean? Because I think sometimes, it's a little hard. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like what issues between siblings, are often about belongings, space, words, so attention. Yeah. So, the issue could be that
she's on my side of the back seat again.
Yes. The issue is the space, not giving each other space or needing our own space, or the issue is name calling. Mm-hmm. Maybe in a relationship, you've gotten into a bad cycle of calling each other mean names. Mm-hmm. And so the issue is, that we need to talk about this issue of put downs and name calling, or as opposed to you being mean. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Mm-hmm. So I like that a lot.
Good.
Okay. So we've calmed down. We've listened, hopefully, to each other. So if you're mediating two people together, you're listening to both and really helping them listen and not interrupt, even though they have a different story, so they can possibly even parrot back. And, as kids get older, I think they can then do that part too. You're saying this is what you experienced. So even though they have a different story, then identifying the problem or the issue. And then what's next in this process? We're at number 4.
Well, the next step would be the problem solving. And I think one of the important things I learned through all my years of parenting and camp directing and all the other experiences I've had is it's much less effective if we impose our solution on those who are in the conflict. How much wiser it is to take the time to let those in conflict come up with the solution. So inviting kids into the problem solving arena with you. Wow, it sounds like you feel like she's spending too much time in the bathroom and you're not getting enough time, so you're feeling late for school. Well, so what are some solutions that each of you might give to problem solving? And, maybe on their own, they'll come up with putting a mirror in her bedroom so the makeup can get put on in her bedroom while he's using the bathroom. But how much better if they came up with that themselves, and then they feel confident, they feel respected by each other. But it's amazing, Audrey, I bet you've seen it at camp. Kids come up with the best solutions.
Yep. And if they have ownership of it because they thought of it, they're much more likely to follow through on it.
Absolutely.
So I love that idea. So if siblings are having a conflict, whatever it might be about, what they're watching on TV, bathroom use, whatever these things could be, use of some other item, what about just saying, okay, what are you guys' ideas of how you could solve this? What are some solutions that could kind of be a good compromise for both of you? And let them work on it.
You used a really important word right now. You use the word compromise. One of the things we learn as we grow is that we can't always get our way 100% of the time, or not 100% of our way 100% of the time. And it's never too early to start teaching kids that, if we could get 80% of the way, that's pretty darn good.
Right.
Because compromise is going to be essential. And okay, on Mondays and Tuesdays, you get to do this. And on Wednesdays and Thursdays, she'll get to do this. But on Fridays, we're going to do it together. Now, I didn't get my full 5 days, but it is a little more even. And that's just, that's how life is. But I think teaching the art of compromise and helping each of us understand that the other person's compromising too.
Yes, I really like that. So again, this probably starts with you modeling, when kids are younger, so now you're arguing about this toy. What are your guys' idea of how you can both play with this toy? And then maybe let them brainstorm. Well, we could do this together, or we could each have a half an hour, or we could whatever. But then they've come up with the solution. You could maybe even write it down. Sometimes you could have them, like little younger kids, you can have them sign a little thing. Okay, like you can have them, okay, let's repeat back. What did we decide? And kind of make a little contract almost that they both look at.
I like that, yes.
You could post it near the toy box. I don't know. I'm just thinking through that. I think that if they've had this part and they have this ownership, then they're more likely to hopefully try to follow through on it.
Yes. I think sometimes getting to a place where they at least have beginnings of a problem solution, or, at least we're going to try this solution and see how it goes. That often is a good place to finally say, do we need to apologize? Is it time to say I'm sorry? Hopefully, we've spent enough time to calm down. They've grown to understand the other person's perspective. They've seen what part they have in it. Sometimes I think that's a good place to say a true I'm sorry.
Right.
What do you think about the timing of that?
I do agree. I think that you need to get past understands each other's feelings and really knows how they might have hurt the other person, because usually both people have done something.
Right.
And that's the part that there's usually an apology from both sides for something. It could be that you just misunderstood or you weren't aware. You could apologize for not being aware of what someone else did. I really like that. And we have so much to talk about with the whole topic of forgiveness and apology, because I think these are kind of lifelong cycles with siblings. These relationships that are our longest relationships tend to have probably the most and the deepest conflicts of our lives are these ones with our siblings. And I recently, actually just as early as this morning, heard of a really deep conflict with a sibling that might kind of be a rift in the relationship forever with. And, it's really hard dealing with those things. And so I think in our next segment, we're just going to talk a little bit more about that with our siblings, and teaching our kids the skills they need, the forgiveness skills and apology skills, but also understanding at what point that, you can forgive someone and you can accept their apology, but you can also have some boundaries of not allowing the behavior to be repeated. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think there's sometimes the boundaries are the most important part.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that can start even with younger kids. So I think we pretty much covered these 5 steps. The final thing that you had mentioned before was that after they've come up with their solution is just following up with them. And depending on their age and what the situation is, saying, you know what, let's sit down again in a week or tomorrow or whatever the timing is and see how it's going with the solution that you came up with. And then you circle back. And when you think about life and conflicts with siblings, these will be over and over and over again. And the good thing is that if they have a lot of conflicts with their sibling, they are learning, hopefully, the skills that they're going to need throughout their life in relationships.
Absolutely. And I think it's good to remember, too, sometimes we hold, we're just trying to keep our act together. We're holding it all in. We're trying to be mighty all day long in 3rd grade. And so when I get home and I'm with those I'm most comfortable with and I'm most safe with, sometimes that's where I let it all hang out.
Oh, yes.
And so it's not unusual that family, siblings, parents are where they see that side of me.
Yes. Okay, well, this was so great, Sara. Thanks for talking about siblings. And we'll be back with part 3 of our rivalry sibling conflict series. Thanks for being on today.
Thank you.
As always, you can find the show notes for this episode, as well as some fun pictures of Sara and me with our own siblings and pictures of our kids with their siblings by visiting my website at sunshine-parenting.com. Search for episode 86. I'll end this episode with one of my favorite quotes about siblings. It comes from Clara Ortega. To the outside world, we all grow old, but not to brothers and sisters. We know each other as we always were. We know each other's hearts. We share private family jokes. We remember family feuds and secrets, family griefs and joys. We live outside the touch of time.
This podcast is a proud member of Parents on Demand, a network of high-quality shows for families just like yours. Download our free network app on Apple and Android and listen to your favorite episodes on the go.